Good evening and welcome to this week's Resistance TV broadcast. Tonight we're looking at the Labour Party's extraordinary decision to appoint a former spy to work in Keir Starmer's office to help run the party's social media output. His name's Asif Kaplan, and he worked for Israeli military intelligence for nearly 5 years in its cyber warfare branch known as Unit 8200, which specialises in spying, hacking and encryption. So what exactly does Keir Starmer want with an ex-spy, you might ask yourself? To help us answer that question, we're joined this evening by Asa Winstanley, who broke the story a couple of weeks ago. Asa's an investigative journalist and the associate editor for the Electronic Intifada. So Asa, tell us what's going on. What have you found?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. Well, yeah, as you said, this person, Asif Kaplan, advertised on his online CV that he was, as he put it, a Unit 8200 veteran on a profile of a former employer. Unit 8200 is, as you said, a unit of Israel's military intelligence. And it's, according to reports, it's quite a large organization. It sort of churns out these high technology spies, really, from the young recruits into the Israeli army, and they specialize in hacking and other kinds of cybercrime. And their main purpose of this unit was part of Israeli military intelligence, as you would expect. It's offensive, it's not just spying. I mean, I called him an Israeli spy, a former Israeli spy in the article. But spying doesn't quite cover the whole gamut of what intelligence agencies do. It involves active measures, doesn't it? It involves sabotage and all kinds of different offensive operations. So what U200 does is, and we know this from whistleblowers from the unit itself, it carries out mass surveillance on the Palestinian population. It carries out what one of the whistleblowers called, I forget the exact phrase, but they called it Israel's big brother. So they're not just spying on and observing and gaining intelligence on what they would classify as Palestinian terrorists and what I would call Palestinian resistance fighters. It's not just that. It's all kinds. Their targets are all kinds of Palestinians, not just activists or resistance fighters, but just normal members of the public, of the Palestinian population living under occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. They are, as the whistleblowers showed, Unit 8200 it targets Palestinians for blackmail. So it snoops on all elements of their lives, on Palestinian life. So one of the main examples that came out in this, what it was as an open letter that was written to the Guardian by a group of, I think it was 43 Unit 8200, former Unit 8200 spies. And they came out with all these different testimonies. And they said that, if examples they gave of any private information, any embarrassing information, any personal secrets, or, just personal details that can be used as leverage to blackmail Palestinians in order to coerce them into becoming informers or otherwise cooperating with the Israeli occupation authorities, is used and leveraged. So, for example, if they may find out that your aunt needs treatment, needs some kind of specialist treatment outside of the West Bank, perhaps in Jordan or within so-called Israel proper, then that can be used as leverage, that they can say, well, we'll offer you this treatment if you cooperate with us. Or, for example, if someone's having an extramarital affair, or perhaps is gay and hasn't come out to their family. These kind of things are all used for the purposes of blackmail.
What's
so
the Palestinian authorities' response to this unit? I mean, what do they have to say about it in terms of how they operate against the Palestinian people? I mean, have they
the Palestinian Authority?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Palestinian Authority is no doubt targeted by this as well, but I haven't seen that they've ever had any particular response to it. I mean, but that would be unsurprising considering that the Palestinian Authority is actually an extension of the Israeli occupation. Really, it's essentially a puppet entity which works on behalf of the Israel, works on furthering the Israeli occupation. It's most of its budget is given over to so-called policing activities, and the Palestinian Authority's armed forces, their only role is to suppress Palestinian dissent, is to suppress Palestinian activism against Israeli occupation. When there's any threat that the Palestinian Authority is going to deviate from that, they're then brought into line, as we saw in 2006. When there was a coup against Hamas as the elected leaders of the Palestinian Authority. But yeah, no doubt it's still 8,200 spies on them too. But I think it's an indication of where the Labour Party is going. I think that Keir Starmer's office would hire someone like this.
Well, no, indeed, I was going to come on to that. But I mean, it's quite a scoop that you managed to get there. And I mean, how did you find out this information? Did you just chance buy it, or I mean, it's quite a big story.
Yeah, thanks. I can't really reveal my sources, but
okay. But you introduce you as an investigative journalist, so it's part of your investigative role then that you came across that. But I mean, it is a big story though, Asa, and there's been very little coverage, if any, I think, in the corporate press. Have you seen any coverage outside of outlets like the Canary, obviously your own, and so on, who actually broke it at the Electronic Intifada? But what other news outlets, if any, have covered this issue?
Yeah, you're right. It hasn't received any coverage in what we would call the corporate press. The only daily newspaper to have reported it was, of course, the Morning Star, which provides very good critical coverage of a wide range of issues, and they did some good follow-up on it. But no, none of the corporate press has reported it in any way. But as your viewers may have seen, and I tweeted about a week or so ago, I was reliably informed that one Guardian reporter did actually want to cover the story, and the Guardian reporter was essentially stonewalled by the Labour Party. And then when they sort of pressed on and persisted and said, well, they're going to write something about it anyway, the Labour Party spokespeople, spin doctors, whoever it was, then appealed over the head of the reporter to the editor in question at The Guardian. And since then, since I learned about this, there's been no story about this in The Guardian. So, you can draw your own conclusions from that. I was told the name of the reporter who wanted to do the story, but I mean, I'm not going to reveal that because I don't want to.
Of course. No, that's a fair comment. But I mean, can you imagine though the furore that there would be, or would have been, had Jeremy Corbyn appointed a ex-spy to work in his office? I mean, you may remember, I think we might have a headline of some of the ridiculous, lurid headlines that were being run a couple of 3 years ago. An invented story, actually, about senior Labour figures taking money from the Czech authorities, or Czech spies, and collaborating with the Czech government. I mean, it's
during
incredible
the Cold War
how the difference in approach, and you kind of, in a way, I think the fact that there's been a kind of a media blackout over this story virtually is just another indication of the media bias, because we saw that example a few years ago, these hysterical headlines, made up headlines, against a real story, and it's a media blackout. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, what should we be doing about that? I mean, where can we go to challenge this sort of lack of reporting, as well as the bias reporting that you often see as well?
Yeah, you're right. It's a really stark example of the media hatred of Jeremy Corbyn, really, and what he stood for. And I think more importantly, hatred of the movement that was behind Jeremy Corbyn. Like there was a kind of democratic uprising for a few years in the Labour Party, you know, and there was a threat to established elites. And The Guardian really was, The Guardian was the main, in my view, was the worst. Like it was the main newspaper leading the fanatical campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, especially on the issue of fabricated anti-Semitism. I mean, no paper did more to take part in the anti-Semitism smear campaign against Corbyn and against the movement than The Guardian. So the fact that The Guardian suppressed this story, Guardian's editors apparently suppressed this story, is absolutely no surprise to me. It's only a surprise that there was a journalist left at The Guardian who was apparently willing to at least try and pursue the story.
No,
but what this journalist was told by the Labour Party was that simply, it's it's not a reliable source, and something along the lines of, this is a non-story, you shouldn't be covering it. So they didn't deny it. They didn't deny that it was true, because it is true, And I mean, I said I can't reveal my sources, and I can't, but I did. I mean, I received information about this, and I confirmed it independently.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely true, and the fact that it hasn't been denied speaks for itself, really.
It's interesting, isn't it, that a real, genuine non-story, they run non-stories, invented stories, and then a real story, they actually accept that it's a non-story and don't run it. But I was looking at his, it was in your article, I think, actually, Acer, what this guy's job is going to entail, and it's a new one on me, but apparently it's something which some of the corporate outfits are now doing. It's this thing called social listening. Can you just unpack that all about? And what's a spy or an ex-spy going to be doing? I mean, I think I characterise it as, is he going to be surveilling the Labour Party membership to weed out yet more, if there are any left, socialists that are still inside the Labour Party and pro-Palestinians?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we that's the $64,000 question, as it were. But I guess for inflation, we should call it the $64 million question. I don't know. I don't know for sure. Social listening. This was a new one on me as well. It just sounds like stupid corporate jargon. But I mean, at the same time, no doubt to remaining Labour members, it certainly has a sinister ring to it. When we consider the last 6 years of defamation against the Labour Party membership, against left-wing MPs like Jeremy Corbyn, and the relentless purging of the Labour Party in the last year by Keir Starmer and his cronies, of any semblance of criticism of Israel, of any semblance of support for Corbyn, of remaining leftists who won't kind of toe the line. I mean, it with so many Labour Party members being, I mean, just today I was seeing a couple of new videos by this group of, I don't know, I guess you'd call them video activists, just Jews, putting out videos of, they've done some really good videos of Jewish members of the Labour Party talking about their experiences in the Labour Party, essentially saying that this is to me is basically that saying they feel comfortable in the Labour Party and that Corbyn has been supportive of them as Labour members, and that the abuse that they've received has actually come from pro-Israel activists, from Zionists, from the right of the party, essentially. Diana Nelson, a Jewish woman in her 80s, like a veteran of the Palestine solidarity movement in this country, is now being investigated for quote-unquote anti-Semitism. It's disgusting, it's ridiculous, it's appalling. And you do wonder what role Asaf Kaplan may have played in some of this. We do want what do they mean by social listening? So according to the job description that was still online last I checked, the Labour Party job description, it said that his role would be to essentially to, as they would see it, protect the brand of the Labour Party. I've got it here actually. So in his job description, it says that his specific responsibilities are to challenge broadcast-focused social media approach to focus on authentic, organic advocacy across the internet. Combine machine learning and human analysis to map the social landscapes of those we need to win over. Lead on challenging disinformation online and empowering our leaders, members, and supporters to be equipped with it effectively. So, that sounds like it's like trying to get a specific message about the Labour Party online.
Do you think it's going to have an effect in relation to Keir Starmer's and indeed his leading team's support for Zionism and move the party even further in that direction and as it were, weed out the pro-Palestinian voices that remain in the party? I mean, it's quite a worrying trend, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very worrying. And yes, it will continue the Labour Party further down this deadly road, really, in all senses of the word, like morally and even practically. It will continue. Like, as you alluded to, Keir Starmer, during the leadership election campaign, described himself as a supporter of Zionism without qualification. Those were his words. That's not Asa Winstanley characterizing him. That was his words, saying that he supports Zionism without qualification. None of this rubbish about saying, oh, well, there's different forms of Zionism and, there is blah, 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 and all this kinds of stuff, which I don't buy in any case. But there was not even any pretense of that. It was just Zionism without qualification. I mean, that sounds like it's supporting Israel right or wrong, no matter is supporting Israel no matter what it does. And so therefore, in some respects, this move by his office to bring in a former Israeli intelligence officer, according to his own testimony, it's kind of inevitable in a way. But it's like the story, when I first learned about this, I mean, I was kind of excited because it's a great story, but it was, I'm not going to lie, I found it a bit intimidating. I mean, I'm not in the Labour Party anymore, but it's the kind of thing that I couldn't have made up. If I was writing a movie script or something that to kind of retell the story of the fabricated Labour anti-Semitism crisis, this is this story is like a joke that you would make up between friends about, what could Keir Starmer do next? I hire a former Israeli spy to purge the Labour Party. But it happened, and it makes
you ridiculous, Asa. You're exaggerating. That never happened.
Yeah. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I mean, I guess what he's doing, look, I mean, we know for sure he's working on the Labour Party's social media, right? That's what the job description says. Monitoring the social listening, monitoring the social media conversation about the Labour Party online. Now, so then the next question becomes that what is then done with it, and what is he doing with it? And the $64 million question, in my view, is simply what is Asaf Kaplan's connections on, what are Asaf Kaplan's ongoing connections to Israeli intelligence? You know, well, we know.
Only that is it though, Asa. I mean, the party's been pretty ruthless since, in fact, even before Starmer came on the scene, they were pretty ruthless in ejecting people who they felt didn't actually, toe the line in relation to the bogus anti-Semitism crisis, and people that had been very outspoken in their support for the Palestinians. I mean, this guy, obviously, with his background, I just wonder, and particularly with this reference to social listening, is that, do you think, going to make them, perhaps more effective at rooting people out, or not? I mean, I don't know how many more people are left to go. I just wonder, but I mean, it seems they're not relenting, are they?
No. It's a good question. I mean, I wonder how effective it will make them. But I mean, as insidious as this is, I will say that, in my view, Israeli intelligence agencies' opinion of themselves, in my view, is quite often, let's say, exaggerated. Now, I don't want to overplay it. Obviously, this is a state with billions of dollars, some $4 billion in military aid from the United States every year alone, right? So all that money goes somewhere, and the Israeli state has several extremely well-funded, resourced intelligence organizations. As we've described, Unit 8200 has been involved in all sorts of crimes around the world. I mentioned the Palestinian population, but Unit 8200 has been carrying out crimes all around the world, and this is an organization really which has been involved in the foundation of private Israeli so-called security firms, so-called intelligence firms, which have carried out crimes in the US and no doubt in the UK as well. Organizations like NSO Group, which created this spyware which can hijack a target's phone, take over the microphone, intercept emails, passwords, everything on your phone, basically, if you're targeted with it. Mm-hmm. And that's come out in various reporting over the last few years. And also Black Cube, an organization, which was hired by Harvey Weinstein, the convicted Hollywood rapist, when he wanted to target his victims for intimidation and spying. He hired this group, Black Cube. And these organizations and others, lots of others, and probably some we don't know about, were founded by or created or otherwise run with the involvement of Unit 8200 veterans. So it's kind of a factory that churns out these high-tech spies, which are used to then sell these kind of nefarious operations around the world. I think that we have to ask, I think there's still a lot we don't know about the Corbyn years and how the Israeli state targeted the Labour Party, targeted Jeremy Corbyn, and all these kind of things. I mean, look, it was a long time ago that this man was in Unit 8200, right? But since then, we know from his own CV, he's been involved in a series of different organizations which are close to the State of Israel. And the latest of those was the Israeli Labour Party, which was for decades the party of government in Israel when it was carrying out its worst crimes against the Palestinians, including the occupation of 1967, the ethnic cleansing of 1948. The Israeli Labour Party, or in various different names, was the party of government in Israel at the time. So this is not a progressive organization. This is an imperialist, racist organization, which has a more slick media operation than the more brazen Likud party.
Mm. I mean, some people have said to me, it smacks of state capture of the Labour Party. I mean, and it was kind of moving in that direction anyway. This is just the latest iteration of that. I mean, and you've written, haven't you, about the role of the so-called Jewish Labour movement and its connections with the Israeli embassy. Say a little bit about that, and how do you think that links into this latest development with this Asaf Kaplan's appointment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a fairly accurate way to describe it. I mean, there's, again, I mean, I couldn't have made this story up, but I wonder what in 30 years' time is gonna come out from the British deep state intelligence sources in the Freedom of Information releases and so forth, if such laws still exist in 30 years' time. But I really wonder the kind of things that are going to come out. I mean, but it's the results are plain to see. The most left-wing leader that the Labour Party in this country ever had was deposed after a 5-year campaign of smears and defamation, and is now in the hands of the former chief public prosecutor, who was British chief prosecutor when Julian Assange was being targeted. The most key phase of the British state targeting of Julian Assange. So that says it all, really. And as we speak now, the Labour Party has just unveiled in a supposed leak, which is very obviously not a leak, but just a release to The Guardian, that they have this new strategy of basically waving the British flag and putting on a suit. Not that there's anything wrong with wearing suits, but like just this weird vacant stuff without any policies in it. I
think we've been there. We've been around this block before, and when Tony Blair came to the ascendancy, there was a move in that direction. Then everybody wearing a tie and a suit and everything like that. Although interesting, when
his presentation over substance,
used to wear a suit and he was well dressed. I mean, he got criticised for that. So if you're well dressed and on the left, you get criticised, exactly. But if you're on the right, it's okay. Or if you're dressed casually, or some might say scruffily on the left, then you get criticised. But again, if you're on the right wing of the party, that seems to be okay, as it were. But what do you think, though, in terms of Labour's foreign policy positioning now? I mean, again, linking it back to this appointment here, and obviously the demise of the Corbyn project. I mean, where do you see the Labour Party going in foreign policy terms, explicitly in relation to Palestine, but more generally in terms of supporting liberation struggles and progressive struggles around the world? What's your thoughts on that?
In a word, to the right. Well, that's 3 words, but you get my point. I think that in retrospect, the Corbyn years now look like an aberration in the Labour Party's history, and the Labour Party is now going back to its sort of perennial role of propping up the British state and its reactionary policies around the world, its imperialist policies around the world. As depressing as that is, all of us, so many of us had hopes that it would be different this time, but it's not proven to be the case. I think do
you think it would have been possible to have secured a different outcome, or do you think the way it went was inevitable?
It wasn't inevitable. No way. Yeah. Yes, it would have been possible. And we've seen that. I mean, as you know, with Ken Livingstone, in his recent videos announcing his legal action against the EHRC for its, in my view, defamation of Ken Livingstone as anti-Semitic, although it's not a defamation case. But he's taking legal action against the HRC's reports and a judicial review. In that video, Ken Livingstone, who's he's getting on now, but he made a very astute analysis of the Corbyn years, and which, in my view, was completely correct, where he said that the problem with Jeremy Corbyn is that he was too nice, and in politics you have to be ruthless sometimes. And I interviewed Ken a few months ago, during a break in the lockdown, and he said a similar thing to me, like that when he came in when he was elected mayor of London in City Hall, he came in and he had a clear out. He fired people. And the reason for that is because these are political appointments. You can't just be sort of soft left, namby-pamby, hippyish about it and say, oh, well, we can't fire workers. These are political appointments. If you've got people in your head office working against you tirelessly day and night, as Peter Mandelson put it, talking about Corbyn, then you're not going to succeed. And unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn was far too Tolstoy, and he should have been a lot more Lenin. He like Ken said, he was too nice, but he should have had a clear out at Labour Party headquarters from the beginning. He should have brought his MPs into line. He should have supported you. He should have supported Ken Livingstone. He should have said there's a major, one of the worst own goals, in my view, was January 2017, the Al Jazeera investigation, the Al Jazeera series, The Lobby, which exposed all these. You asked me about it before, but I rambled off the subject a bit. But it exposed the Israel lobby in the Labour Party, the Labour Friends of Israel and the Jewish Labour Movement, their activities on behalf of a hostile foreign power, the State of Israel, right? On behalf of that power within the Labour Party, exposed their activities. What did Jeremy Corbyn do? Nothing really. There was a statement by him and by Emily Thornberry, and there was a condemnation saying the government should investigate, but they didn't do anything about it. They didn't capitalize on that. They could have, So no, it wasn't inevitable, and there didn't seem to be any. There didn't seem to be any political will for the fight. I mean, look, I'm sure Jeremy Corbyn was in a very difficult position, and it's easy for me to sort of sit here and say should have done this and should have done that. But he should have, he really should have. There was things that he could have done and that he didn't do.
Anybody else though? I mean, because obviously it's quite a lot to put on one person's shoulder. That the failure of the Corbyn project entirely down to Jeremy. I mean,
no,
there were other colleagues. Supporters.
Oh yeah, like
the Socialist Campaign Group, the people in the lead office, etc. I mean,
all of them? Like they were all useless. Let's not mince words. They were all useless. I mean, you were the only MP, Chris, who said this is a smear campaign. And you at first you were very diplomatic about it. I remember seeing the Guardian interview with you when you first came in 2017. You'd been in Parliament before, but you came back in the 2017 election. And it was really just a paragraph or two towards the end of that interview where you were asked about so-called anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And you said something along the lines of, well, I'm not saying it never happens, but in my view, this is mostly a smear campaign, and it's mostly just a dirty trick being used against Corbyn. The interview itself didn't make that much splash, particularly at the time, but the Israel lobby groups, they marked your card from there. The Jewish Labour Movement, Labour Friends of Israel, especially Board of Deputies and all the rest, and they relentlessly pursued you till they got their man, as it were, and that was because you were willing to speak out. And the problem was there's this an inordinate amount of fear and also political cowardice on the issue by far too many people on the Labour Party left, really, that they don't want to rock the boat, and they don't want to. The thing is, if they had stood up and said something, there was nothing they could have done, really. All they have to be told is no, and we saw that with Jenny Formby, really, because she at a certain point before she became General Secretary of the Labour Party and got with the programme and became one of the witch hunters, she was attacked by when she was working for Unite. She was attacked by the Israel lobby for pointing out that Janet Royal had been on a Labour Friends of Israel trip, and that was she really the best person to be investigating what happened at Oxford University when she had this association.
That's that seems to be the sort of start of things, really, from my recollection. The accusations against the Oxford University Labour Club. I think that was in about 20. I know there've been some ripples before that. In fact, even when Ed Miliband, indeed, going back before that. So it's been an issue, it's been bubbling away. But it really broke through when that Oxford University Labour Club controversy hit the fan. And what do you think to the response to that? I mean, my reaction was, again, it was an over response. It should have said, get lost, in my opinion. Get lost. There is this overblown, and you're weaponizing this issue. Go away. Yeah.
That was ground zero. You're right. The Oxford University Labour Club, February 2016. That was ground zero of the fabricated Labour anti-Semitism crisis. This is what we still don't get. Like, this is what a lot of people still don't get, understand, and are forgetting. That was the beginning of it. That's where it blew up. And that is important. And I wrote about this in an article last year where I managed to attain an important document. Yes, you're right. Before it had been an issue before then. Even before Corbyn became leader, as you said, Ed Miliband, there were things happening there. When Corbyn was running to be leader of the Labour Party in the summer of 2015, they brought up this stuff about trying to tar him by association and by attacking Raad Salah, as Palestinian political leader that Corbyn had supported, called for his freedom and so forth. All this kind of stuff by association. Yes, it had been an issue. But what happened in February 2016 at Oxford University Labour Club was really the start of an assault on not just Corbyn, but Corbyn as the leader of a movement, and to attack the popular movement behind Corbyn within the Labour Party as systemically racist, as anti-Semitic. And the reason why that's important is because we now know, and this is what I wrote about in this article last year, we now know that there was this report, there was all these headlines about supposed anti-Semitism in the Oxford University Labour Club, and it was a major story. It was a national story. It was an international story. Roger Cohen wrote about it in his column in the New York Times. It was a major international story. Oh, isn't it terrible? This venerable institution has become a racist institution in a racist Labour Party, which has a long tradition of anti-racism, which is not true anyway. The Labour Party has had a lot of racism in its history, but we now know that this whole thing came about because of a report by somebody who turned out to be a close associate of Shai Massot. There was a report when all these anti-Semitism allegations were alleged at Oxford University. Labour students, this right-wing organisation that was later disbanded, announced an investigation into these allegations. And it did produce a report, but the report was never published, and it was buried by the Labour Party. I managed to obtain the report. I didn't publish it because it's a libelous document, essentially. It was full of disinformation and smears and lies against the Labour Party left at Oxford University. You know, people who were close to, who were perceived as close to Jeremy Corbyn, or who were involved in the pro-Corbyn campaign at Oxford University, were smeared. And in this document, there were not just smears, but there was fabrications. You know, there was actual fake quotes, being anti-Semitic quotes, but they were faked, being put into some people's mouths. And this whole thing was written by Michael Rubin.
Mm.
Michael Rubin is now the director of Labour Friends of Israel, right? So, and he's in the Al Jazeera documentary saying, "Oh yeah, I knew Shai. We did a couple of things together when I was chair of Labour students." So, what were those couple of things? You know, this is a question I put to Michael Rubin, but he refuses to. He's you know, he ignores my emails. Fine, but then, you know, we're left to draw our own conclusions. Yeah. What were those couple of things? Michael Rubin, now the director of Labour Friends of Israel, who wrote this report, what were those couple of things he was doing with Shai Massot, who was a spy for the Israeli government? What was that? And, you know, it's very, there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Your arm's length then. I mean, Shai Massot was, yes, working with people like Rubin, but it was arm's length. And now we've got somebody right in the heart.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's kind of astonishing.
They're cutting out the middleman.
Travelled, yeah, absolutely. What would your advice, before we go to Sean, see what people are saying who've been watching our discussion, what would you suggest that the response should be from people who are still in the Labour Party to this latest development? Because there is a climate of fear that you've mentioned. People are fearful about speaking out. Do you think, I mean, what do you think they should do? I mean, should they speak out, or what or leave? I mean, what do they do?
Yeah, it's a good question. All of the above, I suppose. I mean, look, I'm a writer, I'm a journalist. I'm always a bit reluctant to give people prescriptions of what to do. But personally, I don't really see any hope in the Labour Party. I do think people inside the Labour Party should resist by all means necessary, you know, politically. What that means in practice, I think, will vary from person to person. But I do think that the Corbyn years have shown that, like, the Labour Party, I mean, yeah, state capture. It is state capture by the British state, and to an extent by the Israeli state. You know.
Do you think there's some legitimacy in that assertion, and that some people have put to me that the Labour Party has been captured? Well, I think by both, really. I mean, I think they were putting it to me that it's the Israeli state. These aren't conspiracy theorists either. These are people who are kind of level-headed.
Yeah, I mean, it's both, like, right? Because the British deep state and the Israeli deep state are allies, right? So they work together. So, but they also spy on each other, you know, right? So, Israel is considered to be an ally of Britain, but in reality, if you read the corporate press, they call Israel an ally of Britain. Like in America, they call Israel an ally of the US. But what does that really mean? In reality, Israel is a hostile foreign entity, which is carrying out aggressive spying operations on the US, and that's on the record. You know, we know, like, British, American intelligence officials consider it's very well established that they consider Israel to be the top counterintelligence threat. You know, up there with official enemies like China and Iran, Israel is considered to be one of the top threats to US counterintelligence officers. And we know that from only the most high-profile case of Jonathan Pollard, who only last month returned. Well, he'd never been to Israel. Had he been to Israel? Well, he'd never lived in Israel. He was an American citizen, but he spied for Israel. He was a U.S. naval intelligence officer who then sold top secret documents to Israel in exchange for cash, literally cash stuffed into envelopes, as well as a diamond ring for his then fiancée, and various other perks. He betrayed his own country for Israel, and he was recruited by a Mossad agent who Trump, in one of his last acts, Trump pardoned him. the Mossad agent fled before Pollard was arrested. And we know that this still goes on because the Israelis then later spied on the US at European negotiations with Iran, which involved the British too.
Yeah,
you know,
the record in Iran is a very shameful record. I mean, you think about Mossadegh and its involvement,
right? Yeah, and the negotiations over the to persuade Iran to end its nuclear energy program at the threat of being further sanctioned and so forth. Israel spied on those negotiations because it didn't want them to go ahead, and as we know, Trump then later overturned them. And even there was even a report, I think it was last year or the year before, that the Israelis sought to spy on President Trump's phone calls. They were caught by U.S. intelligence officials setting up phone mass interception towers near the White House. You have to be naive to think that Israel is not spying on the UK too.
No, indeed, and it's a curious state of affairs with the US because I mean they are big benefactors, aren't they, to Israel? But talk about biting the hand that feeds you, I suppose. Let's move to bring Sean in, see what audience reaction has been, and I should just say it's Sean's birthday today, as you can see on screen there. And she's spending it in a perfect, ideal way on Resistance TV with Asa Winstanley and our wonderful audience. So what have people been saying, Sean? Happy birthday, by the way. We can't hear you. You've got to unmute yourself. We still can't hear you, Sean. I don't think she can hear me either.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
You were talking into the void there. Could you hear us? Wishing you very many happy
birthday. I can hear you. Yeah, I was just getting a bit carried away. Love the graphics, Gaz. Thank you very much for that. People are loving this, and they're really thankful that you've done this work, Asa, because obviously it builds on the lobby documentary that was done by Al Jazeera and so many of your past investigative reports that you've done on this area in the Labour Party. I myself have been doing some investigation, which has proved very, very interesting. I'm just going to go through some of the comments online. Lizzie has a question. She said, didn't the Israeli spy fail to get Labour elected in Israel? I wasn't aware that Asaf Kaplan was anything to do with that, but do you have any further knowledge on that?
This is something I mentioned in my article. It's a good point. I mean, it goes to what I said earlier on about how this Keir Starmer hiring this guy is both a moral and a practical failure. Asaf Kaplan worked for the Israeli Labour Party, and he was their deputy head of their election campaign in the April 2019 general elections in Israel. There was 2 elections in 2019, but in the April 2019 election, the Israeli Labour Party's vote collapsed from, I believe it was around 13 seats. They were a list, so it's kind of confusing. They were in an alliance with another party before that, but it collapsed under Asaf Kaplan's watch to 6 seats. This was the party of government for many years. And so it shows that he didn't do his job very well. And yet the British Labour Party then decided to hire him as a candidate to help them win elections. To me, that says, I mean, it's kind of funny, like, because it's like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. This guy's not qualified to help you win elections, clearly. But there's a serious point to that, which is that it suggests actually that not really why they were hiring him. They were hiring him to, I don't know, signal how friendly they are to Israel and things like that. But it could be something even more insidious of, does he still have an ongoing relationship with Israeli military intelligence? We don't know. And so in that role, what is he going to be doing with the Labour Party members' data that he's clearly got access to? And what is he doing social listening on people? There's a lot of valid questions to be had about that.
Yeah, well, we've had enough of Labour Party staffers giving our information over to the press. Let's not say any more about that, and getting paid off for doing it. Angela says a big thank you to ASA and the Electronic Intifada for all the work you do to raise awareness on this. Karen Headley says, heartbreaking at the way Labour have left the party a few months ago and not regretted it. Cannot vote for this sham party anymore. Linda Davis says the Tories and the MSM will destroy Starmer with this treason come the next general election. That's if Starmer's obviously around by then. Are his days numbers possibly? Jean Jones says, does anyone think we're heading for a one-party state? Is that the agenda by Starmer, Blair and Murdoch, do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
I think in many ways we already a one-party state, because we've got two, as Noam Chomsky always put it, two different factions of one party, the business party. And the Corbyn years were sort of an interruption of that. And especially on, so-called foreign policy, on that he represented a threat to the British deep state, that its long-term transatlantic allegiance to American empire would be challenged, and that was really what Israel's opposition to Corbyn was down to. But yeah, I think we're kind of in a one-party system already in a way.
Can I get your thoughts on the reports that have been out in the last couple of days that have said that the Labour Party leaks, headquarter records mentioned, have been readmitted to the party?
Yeah,
I believe Emily Oldknow is back in again.
Yeah, it's terrible. Emily Oldknow in those leaked documents was, I'm sure as a lot of viewers know, said some really disgusting things in internal chats where she said she hoped that Max Shanley would be burned alive, and that she wished she texted something like, "Wish I had," which there was a petrol can emoji, hoping that this young pro-Corbyn Labour activist had been burned alive. Really disgusting stuff. And this actually, Max Shanley was the guy who I mentioned before, who was targeted by this report by Michael Rubin. So they went through some really horrific abuse. Max Shanley and James Elliott and several other leading left-wing activists at Oxford University at the time in 2016, they were really targeted by the pro-Israel wing of the Labour Party, I guess you could say. And yeah, it's disgraceful that she's been allowed back in the party, but it's was probably inevitable under Keir Starmer.
Yeah, sadly, yeah, it was. Yvonne Bannister says, thank you for speaking out. It means a lot. Thank you to Chris and Asa. Great work. Bob Walker says, hi, Asa. Do you know what happened to Jeremy Corbyn's call for an investigation into Al Jazeera's investigation, the lobby?
Yeah, good question. Nothing. The answer is nothing. It went nowhere. It was good that he put that statement out, and even Emily Thornberry, who was a supporter of Labour Friends of Israel, did call for an investigation, but it went nowhere. And the reason for that is, I think, is because, or at least part of the reason, was that they issued those statements in response to the initial reporting of the film before it actually been broadcast. So the initial reporting, if you remember, was in the Mail on Sunday. It was I think the day before the first episode of the series was aired. And the Mail on Sunday, as a Tory newspaper, focused on the part of the series which showed Shai Massot coming up with what he called a hit list against Tory ministers, against Alan Duncan and Crispin Blunt, who've said, some critical things about Israeli settlements, and they're not members of Labour, of Conservative Friends of Israel. They're not members of Conservative Friends of Israel, and they're considered to be mildly critical of Israel. So they were on this hit list, and this was what was on the front page of the Mail on Sunday. It was a good story, the Mail on Sunday doing good reporting for once. That was the focus. So the focus was, Israel's influence within the Tory party. So that's what Corbyn and Thornberry were responding to. They were saying, oh, well, there should be an investigation in this. But when the actual film was broadcast, the series, it became very clear the vast majority of it was actually about Shai Massot's nefarious activities inside the Labour Party. So, they then went very silent about it. And I think that, like I said, that was a missed opportunity. They should have, Corbyn especially, should have said, well, there should have been a purge, in my view, a political purge. He should have cleared out all the wreckers in the Labour Party head office and the Labour MPs, and things could have been very different. So, yeah, it was a really missed opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you on that one. Lizzie asks, the power behind the throne, both here and in America, do they have complete control over our governments yet? What do you think about that, Asa?
Well, I mean, I don't know what's being implied really, but I think that there is. I mean, look, there's a phrase, the deep state. It does get a bit overused, but I mean, I think it does exist. There is a broad phenomenon called the deep state, which exists, especially powerful in Britain and the UK. And what is it? It's simply the what Eisenhower called the military industrial complex, and the intelligence agencies establishing a long-term permanent control of kind of managed democracy in a way, I suppose you could say, that they have essentially a veto power on what government and what governments can do in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to so-called foreign policy. So for that reason, we saw in the Corbyn years, at its most extreme, we saw things like unnamed British Army generals threatening essentially a coup if Corbyn was ever to come to power. Corbyn being summoned in by MI5 to be given a facts of life, briefing or whatever it was, when it looked like it was a possibility that he may enter number 10. So yeah, I mean, there is a deep state. A lot of countries have it, where the military, police, intelligence, these long-term establishments, they have an inordinate amount of power. In the US, we saw the CIA and especially the FBI domestically in the US. The CIA was more overseas operations, but the FBI and other intelligence agencies had something called COINTELPRO, which was their counterintelligence program, where so-called, but actually it was targeted at the population. It was targeted at the American population. So starting with the Communist Party in the 40s and the 50s, and later on targeting groups like the Black Panthers, the American Indian Movement, Socialist Workers' Party, a whole range of different political organizations were targeted for disinformation, for sabotage, and even for outright assassination. And we had our equivalent here in the spy cops, the so-called SDS, the so-called Special Demonstration Squad, and its successors, where undercover police officers infiltrated political groups. So yeah, these intelligence apparatuses are extremely powerful, and they don't take threats to their hegemony lying down.
Yeah, and of course we've got some dodgy, well, there's some questions to be asked around Starmer's involvement with the Trilateral Commission, around his role as DPP and working with MI5 to get MI5 agents off the hook in torture charges. Chris, did you want to follow up on that?
Well, no, I would, but I think we're out of time, Sean.
Oh, that's a shame.
We're up to an hour. Can I just thank Asa for an excellent discussion this evening? It certainly prompted a lot of interest, I think, from our viewers, and we'll put this out on the internet, on YouTube, Facebook, etc., and various other platforms, and it tends to get a lot of further views thereafter. This is a really important debate. We'll perhaps have to return to it. Thanks, everybody, for watching this evening. We will be back at the same time, 7 o'clock next Wednesday. We've got some great guests coming up in the next few weeks and months. Alexis Sale will be joining us. We're going to do a piece on the Craigavon 2, which is a terrible miscarriage of justice, similar to what happened to the Birmingham 6 and Guildford 4. And Mohammed Al-Mazi will be joining us at some point too, to talk about the growth of fascism and what can we do, how to spot it, how do we respond to it, how do we prevent it and push back against it. So thanks again for watching this evening. Hopefully you'll be able to join us next week, and good night.